I'm Holly Zandwell from the Learn and Work Ecosystem Library, and today we're very fortunate to have our 4 graduate students who work with the library to talk with about the evolving field of online libraries and technology impacts on libraries in general. But first, a little bit of background on the library. We're a special collections information aggregator that collects and curates digital resources to help users understand the nation's complex ecosystem of education, training, employment, and work. Our model includes continually updating our open access hub and honoring our commitment to a library that is built by the community for the community, where users can suggest new resources and recommend edits. We work with a core team who reaches out to a wide number of stakeholder groups to feed our collection, 26 different stakeholder groups, in fact. We've also been seeking the engagement of students in library and information science programs because we know we have much to learn from this important growing field that focuses on managing, organizing, and providing access to information around the practices of librarianship and information technology to help people find, use, and understand the rapidly changing world of information. Currently, 4 graduate students in library science master's degree programs are working with the library to help us update our content. Today, we're turning the tides on them. We've asked them to share what they're learning in their university programs about the rapidly changing landscape of information, especially to inform practitioners about the evolving field of online libraries. As we begin today's discussion, each of our students will introduce themselves, their name, program of study, and university. Then we'll move into 5 questions. Also joining us are Stephanie Bailey, who leads our library content and engagement area, and Lucia Weathers, who leads our communications and fiscal operations efforts. You won't see Lucia on the screen, but she's working behind the scenes to help us with this webinar. So let's begin with introductions. Virginia, you're first.
Hi, I'm Virginia Bell. I'm in a master's program of library science at UNC Chapel Hill.
Johanna.
Hi, my name is Johanna Pacheco, and I am with the Master's of Library and Information Science program with the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
Abigail.
Hi, my name is Abigail Smith, and I'm doing a Master's of Science in Information Sciences, fully ALA accredited at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville.
And Nana.
Hello, my name is Nana K. York. I'm currently doing a Master's of Library and Information Science with an Information Technology concentration at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
Thank you all again for being with us today. So we're going to start first about talking about what you're learning about the evolution of online libraries. Are online libraries changing the way people access and use information? And I would say, I won't call on anyone, just start, whoever wants to start first.
I can start if no one else wants to. I would say the main area in which physical libraries in comparison to like online libraries have changed is related to the pandemic. As things just became more online, there were more resources put into online like resources in general, and so as a result, people have been using them more. And then along with that, because of the nature of online information sharing and information retrieval, we see that libraries have been impacted / influenced by the way that we find information online already. So, pretty much any library catalog these days, you will find a search bar that's reminiscent of the Google search bar of some sort. And I think that even nowadays, with the advent of more AI services, you're seeing more situations in which either libraries are trying to more or less keep up with the way that people have been searching for information now, or they're trying to curate the information that they already have specifically for their patrons or whatever library population they have.
I'm so glad you brought up the topic of searching. We're going to talk about that in one of the later questions because it's We know personally that's really changing a lot of the way in which people are retrieving information. So who else wants to talk about your views about the evolution or the developments of online libraries?
I would say that online libraries have made information more accessible to a global audience, breaking down geographical barriers. It also just in general makes libraries and library information more accessible. Like there's physical barriers to accessing libraries, both whether there's a library close to you, whether you can physically get to a library, and if there's like physical barriers, physical disabilities, something like that, that prevents you from being able to access the library, if it doesn't have, say, a ramp to get to it and only has stairs, things like that. So it's really, online libraries are really changing how people can access information.
I can piggyback on that as well. The convenience aspect is definitely the biggest thing that libraries that are online have brought to the ecosystem. However, that has brought the nuance that previously, if you went to the library looking for a resource and you didn't find that particular resource, you could browse and find other resources. Online libraries have yet to catch up and make a system whereby you can easily browse. You go looking for your specific topic or specific resource, and then it returns, if it's a topic, it returns the most popular ones, and those are most popular for a reason. And with restrictions due to journals, subscription-based things, even, you know, my local public library uses Libby, and they only pay for a certain number of copies for ebooks. And if that's checked out, you can't read that. So there's still the issue that I believe libraries need to address as to how to help the online system be a browsing environment as well, so that users aren't just stuck in the same ruts searching for the same resource that might not be available and or might not actually give a diverse perspective and a holistic perspective. So I think there's some opportunity there, but it's definitely, as my colleague said, it's definitely brought convenience and a global aspect to the information situation. So that is not to be thought lightly of.
So interesting.
And I
Johanna.
would like to add on to that. So I feel like the digital libraries has impacted the expectations the user have when interacting with the resources and the information we have available. So for example, some public libraries offer digital passes so they can access museums and online resources. And as a result, libraries have had to see like new partnerships. So there's like Hoopla, there's like digital streaming, there's Freeco, there's digital music streaming services, and etc. So the expectations of libraries are changing now that they are digital. And I feel that, like, as Abigail said, that we are working on increasing that accessibility, but we still need to like address like the limitations, like license limits and other things in order to keep up with community needs and expectations, because we want to make sure that, as well as being accessible, that they are also able to access the same variety of resources as when they go in person to get services, the same expertise level.
Great. So let's talk about what you do in your own scholarly activities, since you're all working on your degrees at a university. What digital tools or platforms do you use most in your courses and internships? How do you see users finding information today? And has the search process changed? And Nana, why don't you go on? You already began to go down that road.
Yeah, so I guess there's the obvious you know, learning management systems that we use, like Canvas. I think some people probably use Blackboard also. I've pretty much only used Canvas since college, but I think that's becoming more like common even in high school now. And then there's obviously the more ubiquitous like online services like Google Drive or like OneDrive, all of the various cloud services that exist of that nature. But then there's the more, I guess, the even more common tools like, you know, Google and any kind of search engine of that sort. And then now we have the AI searches that are also trying to augment those situations. I would say that I mean, I use Google probably every day. Like I probably use a Google. I make a Google search probably at least once a day. And I feel like that's pretty common for a lot of people. I am still very skeptical on using like a lot of AI searches just because I feel like there's a lot of situations in which it might represent the information in a way that I'm not too fond of, and I prefer some of the, I guess, what is technically now more antiquated methods of like presenting the information. Like I like the Google snippets that existed for a while. But then I guess when you're talking about people interpreting their information, we're kind of seeing a shift from the older methods of verifying information. Kind of, everyone has a story of like, you know, you're in your English class or your social studies class, and your teacher's like, "Don't use Wikipedia. You can't use Wikipedia. It's full of incorrect information." But nowadays, we see that a lot of people start their research using something like Wikipedia. And then I would say that along that same line, there's more of an emphasis on an individual user having to really sift through the information. And that's kind of a pun because there is a method called the SIFT method that you know, educators are trying to recommend people do, that really focuses on finding the context of whatever information that they're looking at. And I think that in our very, very confusing in terms of like information and misinformation, like the very confusing online ecosystem nowadays is making that much more of a burden for both people trying to find information and also educators trying to, you know, teach people how to look for and verify information. So
Thanks. Virginia, what tools and platforms are you using most, and how are you seeing some of the search processing efforts changing with users?
I use a lot of databases, so Google Scholar, JSTOR, my own UNC Chapel Hill's library database. I use their LibGuides. I do think that users finding information has changed in like in the last few years, especially definitely with like the increase in AI usage and generative AI and the accessibility of that. So like there's ChatGPT, which I think is accessible to anyone. I think there's like a paid version, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't use it that frequently. But I do know that there's a lot of people in my classes that use it, not to do the classwork, but like they've discussed like I didn't understand this topic that my professor was going over, so I asked ChatGPT to explain it to me. And so I think people are relying a lot more on chatbots and generative AI than Google. I would say from what I've heard by my friends, they use that more than Google. I tend to rely more on Google just because I like that it gives you a lot of different sources, and not every generative AI platform uses that. So those are some of the things that I've been seeing.
Abigail, how about you?
Yeah, the information sources I use are very similar to what Nana and Virginia mentioned. Canvas is our online platform for coursework, and we're using Google Suite for collaboration with the documents, and Excel and the Google Sheets that way. As far as searching, like Virginia mentioned, I do use the journals. I don't tend to go directly to them. I will search them through my library, or I will use Google to find things. I think that Google has made it ubiquitous, the natural language query that has come to be an expectation and causes an issue with catalogs in the libraries. People come to it expecting to ask, find me a book on this, and that's not how searching the catalog works. My other internship is at a public library, and even I found myself searching in the catalog and forgetting that it had changed to author, and it said no results. And I had to remind myself, oh, it didn't automatically say, did you mean title or did you mean keyword? You know, it's not thinking for me like Google does, which is so helpful. And we've gotten so used to how helpful Google is that the things like Boolean query and that we're taught as a thing are just not in the general populace anymore. And so And as I mentioned before, the whole idea of browsing versus searching. You come to Google with, I'm looking for this or I'm looking for that. You don't come to like, show me different topics on this. Or if you do, as in I'm looking for that and I want to see different topics, you don't go beyond the first page. It's something like most research says, 83% of people do not go beyond the first page. So there is a need there to mend the two, to meet them where there's an opportunity for natural language query. And I think that chatbots are, when I go to Gemini and use it, I'm asking, it's like a conversation. But as Virginia mentioned, especially with the AI prompts that are on just the regular Google, there's a list of resources that it's coming from. And so I can say, okay, that's an odd answer. Let me go to that source that you claim is that and read. And then sometimes it's like completely not what I am looking for. So that's important, I think, with the future of AI, to have that resource linked to their answers so that we can still be discernible consumers with that.
Is there a reason why 80% of folks don't go beyond the first click?
Well, the article I read was by Dahlin and Hansen. It's an open source journal article. And I did not read in depth as to the reasoning, but from studies in school, and I'm sure the others could speak to this as well, it's just attention span. Within the digital age,
Okay.
we have a much shorter attention span. And if the information isn't presented to us within a certain amount of time, they do eye movements. If it's not here, it's not there, it's not quick, like Nana mentioned the little sound bite that Google used to give me that I didn't have to actually click on it. I could just be like, oh, that's the answer, I'm done. It's really an attention span that has become less as everything is readily available, readily coming at us. We no longer have to spend the time looking for it. And so, it's laziness, one could say, but it's a conditioning that we've been conditioned that information can be that fast. And so we don't have to look.
That's a lesson learned for the Learner Ecosystem Library, because we're still designing it and trying to help it go fast and trying to anticipate what people are searching for. And, we're going to have to make this useful for however people search and for whatever the reasons. But I hadn't heard that stat before, but that's pretty interesting. So Johanna, what do you use most around your digital tools and platforms, and how are you seeing some of the search processes changing?
Yeah, so for my school, I'm using a lot of Canvas and Google. I also use accommodation services. So I have captioning services and a screen reader and some other things as well to help me with my note-taking. I have noticed that with AI, I can tell when they use an AI captioner versus a human captioner, because when I'll be doing my text, I'll notice the AI miswrites the word. And if the first thing I see is like a lecture or video, and then I go there, I'm like, what term are they talking about? I thought it was this word, and it turns out the AI just found like a synonym word that was spelled really closely or could be mispronounced. And so I've had some difficulties with that, just like being integrated into my studies, or I've had to have some discussions with instructors saying, hey, I know you're using AI to help make this accessible, but it actually made it a little less accessible because I'm not quite sure if I'm understanding this correctly, because I'm not sure if the AI understood it correctly. But that just like goes back because like I've been doing like a lot of like subject searches and doing like the first link page that Abigail mentioned. And what I've been doing recently is if you scroll at the very bottom of your first page in a Google search, there's an option to turn off personalization. So because I'm a remote student in another state, sometimes like the suggested search terms or the examples I'll be given won't match like the examples that my instructor shows me because their search is based in Wisconsin and I'm based off another state. So I will turn off that search result. And as a result, I'll get more references and lists of information that resembles my coursework. So I've noticed that a lot when I'm doing searches. I've been experimenting this semester between DuckDuckGo and the Google searches. And I find sometimes it's nicer to have a little bit more control using a non-Google search because I can pick like a different country. So I was doing research on like children's literature globally, and I can pick like UK and I can search there, and it's easier for me to find data that I need. And I tried a little bit with ChatGPT, the free one, to do that as well. And it turns out the default is UK English. So I'm wondering how much of those results were kind of stilted when I was experimenting with it earlier in the semester. But otherwise, in like the LAS thing, because I work in a public library, I've noticed a lot of those just people wanting to use more natural speech in their keyword searches, saying, I typed in Disney movies and it didn't give me anything because you did not search up Little Princess or Ariel video recording. It's very specific. So I'm doing a lot of instruction of, hey, we use keyword searching. We don't aggregate your data for searches necessarily. So you're going to have to literally type in just like the main title or the main thing. Sometimes something will show up in genre, sometimes it won't.
And not everyone seems to know this. We have someone that we work closely with who uses our library, and that individual has a hard time figuring out what the keyword search is versus using our AI bot. And so generally he gives up because he'll put in a sentence into the keyword search, and then it comes up that there is not anything there. So then we have to say, well, did you go to the bot and ask the bot, which can handle like a sentence and figure it out? No, didn't listen. And so it's clear that we're having groups of users who are not familiar yet with how to deal best with information retrieval, given all the choices. And you guys are all really expert users. So it's interesting, Johanna, that you've seen problems, and I don't know if you can, do you have anyone you can provide feedback to, saying that you're getting misspelled words, or this isn't working totally for you, or you just have no way
I think
to
it's more
let them
like
know?
of an in general kind of thing, because like with the keyword searches, it also go like first word, second word, third word. So when you put in a question like what is or can you find, is searching for can you find, and it doesn't make it to your main subject, because that's how we talk naturally. I don't say Disney princess find in real life. I say, can you find Disney princess movie? So it's not really, as I said, I think it's more of that expectation that we've been mentioning, that people are expecting information quickly. And if it doesn't work, it's assumed that it's broken, not that it's a different functionality or maybe a different system that maybe perhaps is becoming antiquated just with the way that the information
Yes.
system has been developing.
Well, the next question is about trends, and maybe one of the trends is we'll all start speaking like bots because we're going to be learning how to do our keyword questions in a bot format, actually. But so this question is, are there trends in library science or technology that you think we should all be paying more attention to? The kind of things maybe you be learning in classes that we're not learning because we're not, involved, unfortunately, in the library science degree program. For example, technologies like AI's impact on library services, or trends around metadata standards or interoperability between platforms, and even digital archiving. So I don't know if you want to stay with the same order we've been doing. Nana, we keep going to you first. So if you're comfortable going first, that's fine.
Yeah, there's actually, I'm gonna bring up there's a book called I believe it's called The Library Book by Susan Orlean, which is a really good book for anyone just trying to understand what the purpose of a public library is. And it kind of tells the story of a fire that burned down like the LA library, and it's like the rebuilding process. But it really goes into like the history of like public libraries. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because what a lot of people might not know about like the histories of public libraries is that, well, one, libraries didn't used to always be like public service kind of situation. It wasn't something that anyone could have access to. They basically used to be kind of like country clubs. And during that time, you'd pay in, and also, because of social norms, it was also common that women were not allowed to be in them, for example, or kids. But as times changed and things developed, they became more and more open. But one of the interesting things about the early libraries is that they were not specifically just for books, at least in America. There were situations in which like you had sporting equipment in the library. And interestingly enough, we're seeing kind of a return to stuff like that, where if you've ever heard of like the library of things, like there's situations, and I think Johanna mentioned this also, like you can get like zoo passes or like museum passes from the library these days. So there's a situation, or I guess there's this trend of really trying to make the library a central place for accessibility to all kinds of things within the environment or the neighborhood. And I think that is that's core to at least the public library's like mission. And it ends up being a very contextual thing where, you know, not all libraries will have the same things, but they all work on this central kind of theme of trying to make things accessible for people. And I guess the last thing I'll say about that also is just that you also see a similar situation when it comes to digital collections, where because of the nature of online information, you can technically find everything everywhere, you know, at least the most generalizable stuff. But there's more of a focus or an importance for certain collections to hone in on a certain topic, and then that gives it an extra value in that sense because you can't find it everywhere. And that's kind of one of the benefits of the Learning Work Ecosystem Library in that sense, because it's a specialty library in that sense. I would also say that like outreach is becoming a super big deal for libraries, because especially public libraries, because if they don't get funding, then they can't do anything. And the digital nature of how people get information makes it so that some people are less likely to physically come to the library, but it also maybe makes it more easily available for the library to hopefully get access to people like through digital outreach, for example. I know a lot of people who have become very much big fans of the Milwaukee Public Library just because of their TikToks, for example.
That's great. Thank you. Well, that's a good segue to you, Virginia, because you raised the issue of not everybody physically can get to their library. So why don't you go next?
Well, I was going to talk more about metadata. So I'm actually in a class. It was formerly called metadata, but as my professor says, metadata is just data, so there's really no point in using that term. But basically, our final paper that's due this week is we choose a theme related to metadata and we write on it. So the theme I've chosen is data continuity, and I think that's really important, especially with like changes in the federal government and things that are going on right now, just because data is changing and rapidly, especially with generative AI, with things that are going on governmentally, things like that, that it just everything's changing. And how can like librarians and metadata specialists and catalogers predict future data? What data is still going to be relevant in 5 years that's relevant today, with all the changes that keep happening? And that sort of leads me into talking about digital archiving. So a lot of websites have been taken down recently, and I'm sure will be continued to take down in different platforms, different areas. And I think I didn't know about the Wayback Machine prior to this internship, but someone, one of the other interns, introduced me to it, and I found that it's a really impactful platform. And I think the web archiving is very important, and it keeps a lot of the data that maybe it's not relevant today, what was archived a year ago, 2 years ago, but it's still important to have access to that data and to be able to use it if needed, to be able to compare it to current data, things like that.
Do you want to mention a little more about what the Wayback Machine is for folks who might be listening who are not familiar with it?
Yes, so it is a website, and you basically, if you click on a link to a website and it gives you like a 404 error code that the website doesn't exist or something, you can copy the URL and paste it into the Wayback Machine, and it'll give you a list of dates that that website was archived. And it's just, you can click on one of those dates and it'll show you what the website looked at that specific point in time.
Thanks. It's really helpful. Abigail, what's your sense about some of the important trends that we all should know about?
Yeah, definitely what Nana and Virginia mentioned are also very important. And along with that, there's been a lot of talk in my degree about XML and issues with MARC and interoperability. Like, how do we transition to something that can be machine readable by the current programming that's out there, so that, you know, maybe even Google searches could link to library catalogs, because library science was actually ahead of its time with MARC and with some of the computer cataloging and searching, but it's fallen behind because, you know, the internet with its proliferation became XML based, and the MARC isn't interoperable with that. And so there's projects that we studied in my classes to make it interoperable and directions on that, but at this point it's just theoretical. There's not been actual testing that I know of, and I could be wrong on that. I'm not fully informed in that. I just know that it is an issue facing librarians at the moment. And along with that is the metadata, of course, and making it two-pronged with it needs to be machine actionable. The internet, the computers need to be able to read it so that they can link it and then return results, but it also needs to be user-friendly. And that's the other big issue that we've already touched on, is that when a user comes in and wants to search for something, you know, we talked in this internship and in my classes about Library of Congress subject headings and how those have oftentimes, Nana mentioned, they've become outdated. And there's always continual conversation about the controlled vocabulary and updating it. But there's also the fact that that's usually, may I say, politically motivated and not user motivated, because what a user is going to walk into the library and search for may not be the official term. So the importance of linking unofficial terms to the controlled vocabulary and having all aspects there. And there's a lot of redundancy. I found in my public library internship, it had to do with running an audit based on diversity, equity, and inclusion terms. And I found that 43% of the Library of Congress subject headings were incorrect. They weren't linking to a diverse category that this book touched on. And so the user then is trying to find a book about this. Specifically, this was the teen fiction collection, and they can't find it. So it's not user friendly. I remember even as a child, you could click on those Library of Congress subject headings and browse, in essence, give you a list of all the books that were talking about this particular topic. And that's, at the moment, is not. And then that leads to a larger issue, which touches on the issue with accessibility, as that open source is a big deal in library science because of the cost prohibitive nature that a lot of publishers push. Their journal articles, they might let you have one copy that students can access, and it's subscription based. And so then that librarians instead, they used to be able to buy a book, and then everybody, yes, it was whoever got there first, and you had to wait sometimes, but the library owned that book and controlled it. Now they just buy permission to use that journal article or access that, and the publishers can remove them. And the same goes for the Library of Congress subject headings. The publisher actually controls that, and they choose what tags the book does. And then with the library I worked with as part of a consortium, the consortium just copy catalogs directly from the publisher. So if the publisher hasn't tagged that book in a correct manner, then the library doesn't have that correct data. And there's a pushback to giving the librarians who are trained the permission to change those records because they're wrong or because they're incomplete. And that is something that I had not heard discussed much in my degree. When we talked about cataloging, we talked about how to do it. We're trained in it, but we didn't talk about the bureaucracy of, well, maybe the consortium's not going to let you go in there and do that, even though you do have access. But there's, you know, you need to fill out form triplicate 340. You know, it's can be quite interesting and to have to do that. And so, and then to touch on what Virginia said, yes, preservation. What does that mean? What about link rot? Some of the most frustrating things I found in the internship are not actually the government websites, because WebArchive is doing a good job linking those, but there was a webinar that was very relevant to the ecosystem that I was trying to access, and it's gone. The original company has lost it, and it's, again, not government, but they just, you know, time changed, years went by, no one kept that link active, no one made sure it was on some file, some hard drive in the cloud somewhere to give us access, which we could then preserve it, and it's just gone. So yes, what does it mean to preserve that? And then, of course, that links to metadata. If you preserve something but you can't find it, and I'll talk about that more later, but there's the issue of making sure that what's
Thanks so much. Johanna.
For me, I've noticed a lot of like increase in like wanting to be aware of, or maybe not wanting to be aware of how data is being like used with like new technologies like AI. So there's either those that, like are really welcome towards the idea and those that are really just like know and are not like learning more information. They kind of have like this fear, like, how is my data being used? How is it being managed? I don't want to interact with this material at all. And then as an MLIS student, there's a lot of like with the ALA, like we have to protect like patient information. There's a limited restriction. We don't provide data out and all these other aspects that we have to take in consideration because a lot of the librarianship values are making sure that we respect the patrons, the users' privacy, their data, and their access. So there have been a few I've noticed like in my courses, I've attended quite a few like mini lectures on like this is how AI, this is how technology is used. There's been workshops on emerging technology. Like these are some like new software and developments that are happening like in like the private and open source sector that you could possibly implement and use to introduce these technologies to your community because we are in the reality where these technologies are not fading away. And as librarians and people working with communities and the public, we want to make sure that we can serve as people in source experts for those that are unfamiliar with to help guide and help in saying, hey, this is where our society and culture we are moving towards. So we offer one-on-one classes on that or maybe support for people. So some libraries have like one-on-one support like for tech and setup. And when you buy a phone, oftentimes the biggest marketing thing is comes with this AI, comes with updated assistance. And you can see like in the earbuds ad, the music ads, they will advertise their main component as being AI or being like a data aggregator for them. So there's a lot of trends like in the LIS community in order to make sure that we are trying to keep up with this ever-changing technology, but making sure that we ourselves are experts in that and how the information is stored and how we can introduce them to the skills that they will need to navigate these technological innovations in both their personal and their career lives. Because we need to know how your resume is read through an AI aggregator to make sure that you get that job that you qualify for. So you make sure you have those right keywords and sentences in there.
That's great. That's great. Well, our next question, we really was going to be to focus a little bit about ethical and technical challenges, to talk about digital decay issues or data loss or ethics around digital preservation and how your courses are preparing you. Some of you already touched on some of that. If there's a more you would want to add to that, this might be the time to add to it. And then we're going to be at our last question.
Yeah, so there's two things. Well, I'm not gonna say how many things because I might add another thing as I think about it. But the first thing I'll start off with was talking about cataloging in general. One of the main reasons I wanted to do a library science degree is specifically because I find cataloging really interesting. And I've written a couple different papers specifically about the nature of cataloging. So the main thing I wanted to bring up was that there has been a shift from like MARC records, not just in like library science, just regarding metadata in general, towards what is being called BibFrame. And there's been a couple of different like iterations of it so far. But the main thing that is important to note about that is that public libraries in particular, and I would also say school libraries also, kind of are sort of pushing back on updating to something like BibFrame, particularly because the way that MARC is designed for libraries is one, very ubiquitous, and then two, it's costly to to update all of the records for all of the objects that the libraries have access to. And as I've kind of touched upon before, libraries don't have a ton of money. They don't have a ton of professionals. A lot of them are relying on part-time workers at this point to be able to update things for the digital age. In fact, with regards to not just metadata standards, but also like bibliographic like what information you're putting into the record. There have been multiple iterations of the Anglo-American cataloging rules. There are two of them. The most recent adaptation to that is RDA, Resource Description and Access. But there's also been pushback on RDA as well, specifically from public and school libraries, because again, if you don't have the resources to train people on the new way of doing things, they just can't do it. And it especially harms like the more rural libraries that have even less resources. And in a lot of cases, school and public libraries kind of develop their own cataloging, like ways of doing cataloging in general. There's also, I guess, the other side of, as Abigail mentioned, like the publishers and the pressure that they have regarding, they have a lot of control over what is, what kind of what information is represented in the record, and again, because of the lack of funding for the librarians, essentially, there's not much they can do to push back on that sort of stuff. And then regarding archiving, there's a weird like paradox regarding archiving, specifically when comparing it to like physical media, in that we are trying to preserve a lot of physical media by converting it to some form of digital media. But in some ways, the digital media is even more prone to decay than the original physical media. So there's situations in which there's large digitization efforts, but then they have to make sure that they're able to maintain the digitizations and make sure that the information has been marked properly regarding the metadata, so that they know what it is and know how to find it or go back to the original source in the future. And then the last thing I'll bring up, I think that the biggest ethical and technical challenge right now is just artificial intelligence, because I think that and some of this is very salient for me because I wrote an 11-page paper about why I think public libraries should be focused on teaching patrons about artificial intelligence, but not necessarily making use of it specifically in reference services, because there's a potential harm in that people there's an understanding, a general public understanding, or kind of, I would say more like a misunderstanding, that AI can seem infallible in a lot of situations, because even in situations where it doesn't know an answer, it will just make one up, and it will seem plausible enough that a lot of people will just take it for granted without really looking into it. Going back to what Abigail said about the Google search results, people don't look past the first page, and if you're just giving them an answer in a little box at the top that seems definitive, regardless of whether it's accurate or not, that's only going to make the problem even worse. And the core issue of AI right now, at least, is that the way that artificial intelligence works right now, it's not even intelligent. It is a probability machine that is based on whatever data it was given. So if the data wasn't cleaned up, if it's not updated properly, if it's depending on where it was sourced from, all of those situations can lead the AI to just really bad results. And then there's the issue of we might be overestimating what AI can do, and that could lead to what are called AI winters. The idea of AI has been a thing since the 50s, and since the 50s there have been 2 AI winters, because in terms of development, because people overestimated what it could do at the time, and so people didn't want to invest in it anymore. And we might be on the brink of another one of those if people continue to feel like it can do more than it can actually do at right now. I would say that it's important for libraries and librarians to emphasize the risks, especially about, and I'm not even going to go into it, but like data privacy types of stuff regarding AI, but just environmental impact, and then also just the impact on people's livelihoods regarding either jobs or like information safety or disinformation. But that's a lot. But
Can I
Virginia,
tag?
do you? Oh, go ahead, Abigail.
Can I tag team on that?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Nana. The bib frame, that was what was not coming to my mind. Thank you for bringing that in. I can totally resonate with what Nana is saying, because I found that there's this great divide. You have the general public that thinks AI is magic and infallible, as Nana mentioned. And then you have, in my experience with this other internship, you have the librarians who are very suspicious of it and do not believe that it can be accurate at all. And it seems like there's an opportunity for middle ground, as I mentioned earlier, being educated as librarians. We can see that, okay, there's resources we can link, we can teach our patrons to look at where this information is coming from, not just accept it, but also not reject it. Because the potential, especially with the digital age having, and not just AI, but in other areas, when I was wanting to do this audit, I thought I could just run a report out of the catalog, reading the LCSH. And so there's a lot of, even though there's this history with MARC and the digital catalog that is rich, but there hasn't been the programming for searches, for running reports. There's an opportunity for more programmers. And I know, sadly, this is not an area that programmers want to go into because there's not a lot of money there. They could work for other big companies and get a lot more money. But there's the potential, all the data's there, but running the reports, doing the programming, I've dabbled a little in Python, and I know that it can be done. It's just not been written. And so I find that that is a huge opportunity and a trend. And especially librarians, and in my degree as well, they talk a lot about open source alternatives. And I've mentioned that before. But to do that, you have to create it. And so there's a lot of proponent of these things that aren't getting created. So we love to talk about all the potential in library sciences, but when the rubber hits the road, we're still accepting what the publisher is giving us. We're doing what the consortium says. So I find that quite interesting. And then this is a side personal thought when we talked about data decay, is I'm hitting close to the end of my program, and I'm realizing that all these things I've created for my degree, I'm using Esri's platform to create maps and information that way. I've created YouTube videos, and all of that is thanks to my degree on professional platforms. And so when I stop being a student, I lose access to all these things that I've created unless I find a way. The Esri is pretty much from day one. When they say you graduate, it's gone. So, and unless I pay, it's a ridiculous price, prohibitive amount to have my own Esri membership, but that's gone. It used to be, you wrote a paper, you get to keep the paper. Now all this time and effort, I'm creating web pages, and those are going to go away. And so it's quite interesting, and they don't talk about that. I stumbled upon it because I downloaded Office 365, and I'm like, oh, what's going to happen to this? It's going to be gone. I'm going to lose Office 365 because it's subscription based. And so I found it interesting that here we are in a degree that is all about data preservation and that, and we, the guinea pigs, are going to lose it. So that's just on a personal note. I'm scrambling to try to figure out, well, all this work on my website, writing that HTML. I mean, I'll still have the text documents for the HTML, but I won't, I'd have to pay for my own website to host it. So anyways, I'm just saying that there's an interesting aspect for that as well, personally.
It's such an interesting dilemma. So Virginia and Johanna, and then we're going to come to our last question. So
I think they've basically said everything that I didn't already say for question 3. I don't think I have any additional things to say for this question. Sorry.
I have maybe one thing to say. So I think the biggest concern for me is the disinformation, misinformation aspect, because a lot of what AI does is not malicious, it's not disinformation, it's not malicious, deceptive intention, it's misinformation. It's, as Nana's saying, it's just a probability thing saying, oh, is this the answer? And it may be incorrect. And we're noticing a lot, especially with the younger age population, like those in school, like middle school, elementary school, etc., are having problems identifying misinformation just because they, one, have a shorter expectation span, and two, they have expectations that information will be delivered like that, so they're not engaging in those critical thinking skills. And then with AI, there's also a lot of child privacy protection acts that we have to be made aware of, where I believe in most of the United States, the age is 13 before your data is supposedly supposed to be processed by companies for like private sector for profiting and for ad targeting. So with AI, a lot of that like pre-screening and the sign things, the children will just click on click and not realize what is happening with their data. So with the library sector, there's a lot of educating the parents saying, hey, we're providing you with like this bookmark, this time of saying, hey, there's some information you need to know about AI to understand how it's affecting your child's education, because these children are going to grow up and they're going to continue to be using the library and other resources. And we want them to have that critical thinking skill of being able to say, hey, AI gave me this probability answer. How can I verify it if it's correct or not? So I'm noticing like a big trend just with the tech of we're losing that critical thinking skill, like as a society, of being able to identify the information we preserve, which is why I find like the Learn and Work library really interesting, because we, the experts, are aggregating that data. So the probability of the information being correct is statistically higher than if we were to just stick it in a different AI aggregator, because we already pre-screened kind of the data. So we know that it has a pretty good base that it's built off on.
Thanks. Well, this is going to be our last question, and I'm going to ask you all to look back to your own studies. In some cases, some of you are already working in libraries part-time. But what are two most important things you've learned in your graduate program so far that you think would be good for others wanting to understand the changing information world better to know about? So just two, and it'll be interesting to see what you all come up with. So Nana, you're first for the last question.
So you want me to just start with one and then we're gonna
No,
go
no,
back
no,
down?
no, sorry.
Okay.
Just no, what are your two? Yeah.
Okay. I had two written down, but now I'm thinking about a different one. I'm going to combine two of them. I
Okay.
think context is king. But along with that, information has inherent value. And the reason I'm saying that is because public libraries in particular, like with regards to the International like Federation of Libraries Association has like a document that's like the public library manifesto, and they basically point out that the point of a public library is to provide free access to information so that it can facilitate a democratic society. The inherent, what's kind of I guess buried in that is that having access to information is valuable, and there's a vested interest for certain, I guess, stakeholders to maybe safehold or safeguard information or access to it. And I think that is a key, a very important thing that people have to understand when it comes to like privacy, because your data is information that is considered valuable for whatever reasons. And the main thing is that, yeah, there are certain people who can profit off of that. And I think it's important for, like, as Johanna was saying, it's important for libraries and librarians to communicate that to their patrons. And then the other thing is that the internet has had a lot of, I guess, effect on the nature of information sharing and understanding. And again, it has direct implications on the nature of the future of libraries. Ultimately, though, I think it's just a matter of, I guess, money. where is money going? If public libraries in particular, and in public schools that have libraries in them, but that's also starting to change also. If they're not funded, that undermines a lot of I guess the democratic society, essentially. So
Thanks. Virginia, what are the two most important things you think you've learned in your graduate program so far to
I
share?
have three, but they're all sort of intertwined.
Okay.
So the first one is that the field, more specifically AI, but also just information library science in general, is changing faster than research, than policy can come out. So policy is not caught up to research or caught up to AI, and that's sort of piggybacking off of what Johanna was saying. Just we're not having the right restrictions for AI that should be out right now just because it's changing so quickly. And so the next thing is that AI is sort of it's becoming intertwined with this field, the field of library and information science, but we need to like remain critical of it and prevent absolute reliance on it. And this sort of ties into there is a lack of digital and information literacy in the United States, in the world in general, especially with older generations and the younger generations. They're just sort of more trusting of whatever they find, and we really need to be remaining critical and teaching information literacy to these generations because we can't have them absorbing misinformation, disinformation, and not understanding what's true and what's not.
Thanks. Abigail, what are your two?
I also have three, but I'll be quick. And in, you know, respect to Virginia's professor, but metadata, metadata, metadata. If you can't find it, what's the point? That's a huge issue facing libraries. And then the second is the empty library, which has been a thing, and the others have touched on it as well. If everybody can just Google it, what are we needed for? And I think Nana mentioned that there's an idea of a trend in libraries becoming, while they'll still host some books, but their primary focus is more of a community center and having events. And this is nothing new, especially for younger kids. There's always been programs for them, but now libraries are remodeling and doing maker spaces and having just a community area. And people at the library that I'm interning at, the seating area is full of people who will work almost all day. It's a, you know, work from home situation, but because they have fiber, which is amazing. I do not have fiber at home, but if I had fiber internet, I would be happy. And librarians offer that, at least here in Oregon, most of them do. And so people go there to do their work and have their meetings. And so that's kind of a like, does what a library means, has it changed? And how do we work with that as information professionals? That's the other issue. And then the last issue is perhaps somewhat controversial, but I'll just go there because I am in a somewhat controversial degree. We don't shy away from controversy, right? There's this idea in the past that librarians are neutral hosts of information, providing, you know, whatever information you need without bias. But we live in a very, very polarized society, and there's a big trend for the critical librarian and how the information is no longer unbiased. And so we need to be advocates. And generally what we're to be advocates of, as the trend is in a certain direction. And it's most of the proponents are on a certain side of the polarization. And so I'm just asking, is it possible to find neutrality? Because if we do go down that path, then the library no longer is a place where everyone is welcome. It isn't. I have had conversations in my public library with people who are taking it for granted that we're all going to agree on this side of the issue, but we're not. And if we can't discuss it, and if we can't agree to disagree, then the library doesn't become a welcoming place, which is what it has been. And yes, we aren't ever going to all agree, and we aren't ever going to be truly neutral, but we can professionally offer a neutral environment. So I find that as an interesting thing that isn't exactly being talked about, the implications of that, but as an issue, it is being talked about. So.
Thanks. Johanna, you're going to be the last word here.
All right. Mine's kind of like a one that's technically two, but is the thing that I have felt has been echoed, and I'm basically going to summarize one with teachers, that everything that you learn in your degree program is going to become outdated within 5 years. So we are encouraged to continue studying, to continue learning. It's like whatever you learn here, keep it for reference because it's going to change. It's not going to be here. Either it's not going to exist, it's going to completely change form, something is going to replace it, but you have to keep learning. So my biggest takeaway from my program is that you have to keep challenging things, trying new skills, being part of new programs, because you do not know what's going to click, what's going to stay. Maybe that AI winter will come, as Nana said, or maybe, just maybe, it'll actually just keep on going and we might be more capable than we think. Even though we're heading there, we don't know for sure. We don't know where the trends are going to be. So the important thing that I've learned through my program is that you have to keep challenging, you have to keep learning, you have to keep connecting, go to those meetings, go to those webinars, even if you're like, you go in, I've signed up for ones and I'm like, oh, there's going to be a lot of people. And there's 10 people there. And it was like a nationwide webinar. And I'm like, oh, hello, everybody. And there's like someone from Canada and there's someone from Australia. And I'm like, okay. But you just have to keep on learning, keep on making those connections. That's just the biggest thing I've learned in my program. Because if you don't challenge yourselves, you're not preparing yourself for the world that's changing, and you're not going to be able to help others. It's the main profession of a library is, like Abigail mentions, like providing the things, and as Nana says, evolving to provide other things like maker spaces and studios. And if we don't evolve ourselves or challenge ourselves intellectually, we're not going to be able to evolve with it. And with the lack of funding, we need to make sure we're looking into every single possibility, because the library world isn't like a single discipline, it's interdisciplinary. We're working with tech, we're working with educators, we're working with all these stakeholder groups, which I didn't even knew there were that many until I took on this internship. We're working with so many things that we need to make sure that we are looking into every possibility in our field. And that's my bit.
Thank you. This has been an interesting hour to spend with you all, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to meet with us. We've learned a lot of lessons, and we're going to put this out there for folks to learn from. So thank you again.